Good afternoon, and you're all very, very welcome. I'm Mark Morgan. I'm a professor here in education in DCU. And with me is my co-chairperson, Ross McLaughlin. And Ross's background is with Feroya. So I'll just say one other thing before we start, and that is that the person who's coming after us in this needs to be away early. So we have to be very fussy about time. Sorry about that. So I'll hand you over now to Ross, who will introduce the speakers.
Hello everyone. I'm delighted to be joining you all today on behalf of all the young people in Feroya, Ireland's national youth development organisation. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing you to René Veenstra, Professor of Sociology, University of Groningen in the Netherlands, and Eva Romera, Associate Professor at the Department of Psychology at the University of Cordoba in Spain. Professor Veenstra is the Director of the Inter-University Centre for Social Science Theory and Methodology. He was a visiting professor at the Department of Psychology, University of Turku, Finland, Associate Editor of the Journal of Research on Adolescence, and coordinated the Kiva anti-bullying programme in the Netherlands. In 2015, he was awarded a prestigious Vici grant. He's published on a variety of topics, including bullying and victimization, peer relations, and social network analysis. Welcome, Professor Veenstra. Professor Romera is Director of the Master in Applied Psychology in Education and Social Wellbeing, and member of the International Observatory of School Violence. She has been involved in the analysis of psychosocial risk factors associated with the involvement in school violence and peer victimization. She also has experience in working in training programs in schools. She currently holds principal investigator position in a nationwide study of social and emotional traits related to bullying and cyberbullying, and is principal investigator of a European project about the development of social competence in children to promote well-being and mental health. Welcome, Professor Romera. I will now hand you back to Mark, who will introduce today's fascinating topic. Thank you all for your attention.
As you will have noticed, the title of the presentation, the joint presentation, is Social Networks and Social and Moral Competence, a New Challenge in Bullying Prevention. Now, we've known for several years that there are at least two dimensions to understanding the causes of bullying, one of which is sort of psychological, having to do with personal makeup, and the other has to do with social factors like peer influences. Now, what today's presentation is going to do is to examine how those interact with each other. And they're going to draw particularly on longitudinal studies, because longitudinal studies have a way of enabling you to see cause and effect in a way that's better than in any other way. A major emphasis in their paper will have to do with moral and emotional competence, and also how that competencies interact with social networks. Overall, their paper will give you a holistic model and help to understand bullying as an immoral phenomenon. Their work also has implications for education and indeed for future research. So I'll hand you over now to our two speakers. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Ross, thanks Mark for introducing me. Today I want to talk about social norms in an era of individualization. And later this week, many of us will be at the airport. And if you look at the airport and you look at all the bestsellers that are sold there, you will see that many of these books are self-help books. And that's a reflection of that we live in a time, in an era of increases in individualization. That has brought, of course, many advantages. So my personal background is that my father had to leave secondary education during Second World War. And my mother was the youngest in the family, And there was no money for her to go to college. Her older brother went, but there was no money for her. So luckily I was born a bit later, and even if you came from a bit low SES background, you still could go to college, to university, and become a professor. So there was a lot of hidden talent, and thanks to meritocracy, people could go up, be mobile. There's also a freedom to be different nowadays, and that's also one of the big advantages of this modern era. But there are also other things that have changed. And here you see the Palme d'Or, the Festival of Cannes, and you have to know that I'm really a movie fan. So my website is under construction right now, but normally I have a list with my top 500 movies of all times. And so I have a question for you. Do you have any idea from which country the winner of the Palme d'Or came this year? So is there someone who knows? South Korea, indeed. So I'm not sure how many people have seen South Korean movies over the years. Are there people who have seen more than 5 South Korean movies? Yeah, but you're from South Korea. But it's indeed an important country. And why am I saying this? Because here you see him, Bo Young-ho, the winner of the Palme d'Or this year. It was by far the best movie in competition, all the critics said. And it will be worldwide released pretty soon. So if you remember one thing of this talk, then it is that you have to go to this movie, Parasite. But why I'm saying this? Because I have a friend in the Netherlands, and he lives in a small town, and what do you think he likes? Korean movies. I have my list with 500 best movies. He has his list with his favorite Korean movies. He has a list of 200 favorite Korean movies, and he only lives in a small town in the Netherlands. That was impossible 20 years ago. But now in this era of globalization and digitalization and the DVDs that can be shipped worldwide, and the online content, it is possible to be a movie fan of Korean movies in the Netherlands. So many advantages, but there are of course also cons of this era of individualization. There's an undeniable shift from solidarity to individuality. And we have to be careful, I think, because maybe we are not too late yet, but our society is really changing, I think, into more and more what you can call social Darwinism. So where those who do not succeed can only blame themselves. And also the paradoxical consequence of this individualization is that maybe we lose the skills to take into account the behavior of others. But I think that we can give an applause for ourselves. So please do. Give an applause for yourself, because you have no idea why you're applauding, but I think we can give an applause for ourselves because as bullying researchers, we really devote a lot of attention to the group. So we do not follow this me culture, but we are really interested in group processes, in network processes, and that's also thanks to Christina Salmi-Falli with a landmark article from 1996 in which she showed that bullying is really a group process. So we should not only look at the individual, we should not only look at the victim, not only at the bully, but at this group as a whole. And if we come back to these self-help books, I doubt whether we will find quotes like this. The one by Einstein. So the world is a dangerous place, not because of the people who are evil, but because of the people who don't do anything about it. I'm not sure whether you will find it in a self-help book. Or Martin Luther King, who gave a very good advice, that in the end we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. So to come back to the self-help books, quite often the best chapter in the self-help books, what is it? Well, the chapter in which you have to seek contact with other people. So Today, we have to think about how other people can influence our behavior, how norms work, how networks work. And people who know my research may know that a lot of my research is focused on social networks. So here you see a social network, and it's a defending network. And we collected also data on the bullying relationships in the network. And what we saw was that there were 3 bullies in this classroom. You can't see it here, but you have to trust me, these are the 3 bullies. And these bullies also have some assistants. These 2, it also turned out that these 2 were assistants, but the funny thing is that only these 5 people are really a group. And then you have 2 other groups in the classroom, a group consisting mainly of boys, and by accident 1 girl, a group of mainly girls, and by accident 1 boy. And what you see here is that within these groups there are many defending relationships. So you see that the class is divided in groups of boys, groups of girls, and then a group containing both boys and 1 girl, and that are the bullies. And you can also see that here is some strategic behavior going on, because these bullies also help each other. And what also is very important about this classroom is that there are very, very large differences in popularity. I standardized the popularity scores, so the average is 0. And what do you see here? The bullies have a score of +2. Well, +2, that is really the upper corner, that is reflecting that all the popularity nominations are going to these 5 people. And the others, they score at the bottom. They score minus, they score negative, and it's a very skewed distribution. So minus 0.64 is almost the bottom. So it's important to realize that these processes occur in many classrooms. And in a later study, Gijs Huitzing, my colleague in Groningen, and I, we did the first longitudinal social network study on bullying and victimization and defending. And that was published in the Development of Psychopathology 5 years ago. And here you see again a network, only a small network of 3 people. Where is the pointer? Here. And you see 2 victims, I and J, 1 bully, H. And these 2 victims, they share the same bully. So they are bullied by the same person. But the question is, what happened before? Might it be the case that, for example, in the beginning where there were just 2 victims, and they were bullied by the same person, and then these victims thought, well, maybe we should help each other, maybe we should support each other. But it might also be the case that initially there was a victim, I, that was bullied by this person, and there was someone always helping the victim, person J. But then the bully maybe became irritated and thought, well, all the time that I try to bully person I, there's always that person J, let's bully that person too. And we found evidence for both processes. So that victims start to support each other, but also that bullies target the defenders of the victims. It can also be the case, of course, that 2 bullies share the same victim. And that's what you see here. There are 2 persons who both bully, and they have the same victim. And it might be the case that in the beginning, there were just 2 persons bullying that 1 victim, and that later on they thought, well, maybe we can strengthen our position and also now and then help each other. And that's what indeed was the case. But it might also be, of course, that it started in this way, that there was 1 bully for this victim, and that this bully always had a companion who now and then helped, and that this companion also learned the vulnerabilities from this victim. And we also found evidence for that, even quite strong evidence for that. And it's very interesting to see that all these 4 processes that we hypothesized that we found evidence for that. So it's very interesting to look at bullying from a social network perspective and to look at who bullies whom, who defends whom, and so on, and to do that in a longitudinal way. Okay, I would like to continue to my thoughts and my research on social norms, because I think that it's quite a new era for research. So, social norms is about what is appropriate or what is typical in a particular context. And there are social facts. And these social facts, they can be seen as the conditions for individual action. They lead at a micro level to individual action. But then it also stimulates certain behavior and leads to social outcomes at the macro level. So here you see a macro model. And if we think about bullying and about social norms, then I will come back to this micro model, because I think it can give insights in the mechanisms why social norms are important to study. Well, if we do research on social norms, there is an important distinction, a key distinction between, on the one hand, injunctive norms and on the other hand, descriptive norms. So injunctive norms are about what people ought to do, what is appropriate behavior in a certain situation. It's sometimes also called prescriptive norms. And in the end, it is the aggregation of attitudes. So the attitudes of all the children in a classroom together lead to the injunctive norm in a classroom. And then you have descriptive norms, and that's more about what people actually do. So the most prevalent behavior. And again, if you want to get the norms in a classroom, it's the aggregation of what all the people do in the classroom. But there is a third type of norm, and that one is one that has increased its importance. And that is about what type of behavior is associated with popularity. So it's not so much about what all the people do, but what in particular the popular people do. And that is quite often called norm salience. And that is the status or social prestige norm. And people usually calculate that by the within classroom correlation between a certain type of behavior and popularity. And here you see an example from a study by Kathleen Peets and also Christine Sommerfalli. And here you see that popularity in general is always related to a higher level of defending. But it matters, it depends on to what extent in the classroom bullying is related to popularity. Well, to explain this, I come back to the macro-micro model. So there is a link between bullying and popularity. For example, a very strong positive one, like 0.73, an enormously strong positive association. That might lead to a situation where all the kids in the classroom conform to this pro-bullying norm, because that is the way to get positive external benefits. That is the way to get social approval and be included in the classroom. And that leads in the end to more bullying and less defending. And that's what the authors actually found. So in the class with the very strong correlation, 0.73, the association between popularity and defending was the weakest. Interestingly, there can also be another micro mechanism underneath this macro phenomena. So it's indeed the case that when the norm salience for bullying is strong, that it leads to more bullying and less defending. But it might also be due to what this figure from Futurama would call pluralistic ignorance. So I'm not really sure what's going on, so I'll just mimic everyone else. So it might also be that the link at the micro level is that people wrongly assume that most people accept the norm to bully, and for that reason they adhere to this unjust conviction, and that leads then to more bullying and less defending. So what we have to do is that we think about how can we change this, and how can we install a prosocial classroom. And then again we can think about this macro-micro link, and we of course then want that people conform to prosocial behavior, and that the social approval becomes of showing that kind of positive behavior, and that you are included if you show that. But the problem is, how can we install a prosocial classroom? Because in many classrooms there are multiple norms. And from a recent study in which I'm involved with Lydia Laning-Weiner, we have learned that very often, if there are multiple norms, that bad wins from good. So if you try to install a prosocial norm, but aggressive behavior, negative behavior, bullying behavior is still associated with popularity, then you will see that that negative behavior wins. Here's Lydia. And only if there is not an association between aggression and popularity, only if the negative norm is non-present, then you will see that the prosocial norm has a chance, and that friends' aggression is no longer contagious, but that the class is immune to such negative behavior. So, to remember from my talk, I think we can be proud as bullying researchers that we really notice that the group is so important, and that people are stronger if they act together. I think it's also important to realize that there are many avenues for further research on social norms, because this is really a new area for bullying research. And one of these avenues for further research might be that we have to think about how can we correct misperceptions of norms. And another thing that I want to pay attention to is that we have to think about how can we install a prosocial classroom. So, to conclude, this book you cannot buy at the airport, but it's definitely of help. And it's definitely of help for our quest for the larger we. So, read this book, and if you are particularly interested in our chapter, email me, because I'm pleased to forward it to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you so much for your kind introduction to our presenter, and thank you very much for the organizer, especially Professor James Higgin, for the invitation. Congratulations for this World Anti-Bullying Forum, a great opportunity to share scientific and practical knowledge to prevent bullying. It's a pleasure for me to share this session with Professor René Veenstra, a reference for the scientific community in the study of this complex behavior. And we are happy also with his participation on some of the research that I am going to introduce. I'm going to be so quick because we have to adjust to the time. I'm a member of the Laboratory of Studies about Convivencia and Violence Prevention, led by Professor Rosario Ortega Ruiz, and we work together to research and design effective intervention to promote social relationship and well-being. In this way, it is known that individual variables like empathy, social competence, moral disengagement, or social goals are related to the implication in bullying. But what is happening to the social structure of participation of the group that is defined by the social norms and social status is also relevant to understand this behavior. Longitudinal studies have demonstrated that low empathy contributes to bullying perpetration. Recent neuropsychological and psychopathological studies have put in evidence that the study of empathy requires considering three main dimensions: cognitive empathy, emotional contagion, and emotional disengagement. In fact, we have shown that this ability to avoid others' people emotion has a higher and direct relationship with bullying than the other dimensions. Thinking of the motivational view, recent advances in research indicate that peers not only want to belong to a group, but also seek social status, prestige, and visibility. And repeated and unjustified aggression towards classmates may be a way to achieve this status. Regarding moral domain, neuropsychological studies have shown that when we make moral judgment, we activate different parts of our brain. Developmental studies about bullying have paid attention to different moral elements. In fact, moral disengagement has been highly connected with aggressive behavior. Recent longitudinal studies have shown that moral disengagement predicts bullying behavior. But we saw the need to develop multidimensional models to further investigate the relationship between moral, motivational, and emotional variables to explain bullying behavior. In order to answer to this question, we are developing a longitudinal study with 4 waves. At this moment, we are collecting data of the last one, and more than 4,000 students between 10 and 16 years old are participating. One of our preliminary results point out that the ability to look for visibility and prestige in the group and to disconnect from others' emotions can explain why students activate cognitive mechanisms that allow them not to feel guilt or shame when they hurt others. According to these results, it's very important that bullying programs address these variables to maintain and support bullying behavior over time. The main role of social status among peers and the differences in bullying depending on the group norms led us to think about a new research question. Does the social status on bullying roles vary depending on the social structure of participation in the group? Previous research has examined the relationship between bullying roles and social status, but little is known about if this relationship depends on whether a class has a pro or anti-bullying norms. In general, in popularity, victims have the lowest levels, and aggressors and defendants similarly high levels. Regarding social preference, defenders show the highest levels, whereas victims and aggressors the lowest. But when we observe the differences between class norms, in pro-bullying classes, there was a more hierarchical structure. In these groups, victims had the lowest levels of popularity. This result highlights the situation of loss of prestige which suffers the victim when their own classmates take intimidation as a normative dynamic. However, defenders had higher popularity in pro-bullying classes. This might suggest that despite the prominent aggressive social norm in a group, paradoxically, help victims and facing bullying is well perceived by the rest of the classmates. We need to go further to understand the norms and moral attributions depending on the group. Thinking now in ages, only in primary we found differences, where defenders were more popular than aggressors. Differences between class norms were also found in primary classes. Thus, aggressors in anti-bullying groups obtaining the low popularity with no differences with victims, which may indicate a rejection of dominating behavior in these classes at these ages. No differences in secondary schools might be because during adolescence, obtaining and maintaining high popularity is more important than any other type of social goals, and aggression is a useful strategy to get it. Class norms play a key role in popularity in girls. In pro-bullying classes, victims obtain lower levels than other roles. This highlights the close relationship between isolation and victimization only in girls, mainly in classes where bullying is normative among peers. As a result, intervention should be addressed on 3 levels: to individuals, the peer group, and the school ecosystems. It is the model that over years our group has been working, that is known as convivencia. This concept goes further than living together or coexistence and implies the complex system of relationship into the school context, the way to manage it, and the associated problems. The word convivencia is one of the most relevant in inspiring educational practice and culture. Our next challenge is to know how moral disengagement and need for popularity influence influences processes and how class norms can moderate this influence. We are using longitudinal social network approach to find this answer. All these scientific advances have been incorporated in the design of a European research project to promote social and emotional competence of children. Our Spanish team, together with Norway and Poland, participated in the design and implementation of the BOOST approach. BOOST is based on the multidimensionality of the model of social competence. According to this model, improving social competence requires not only to promote social and emotional skills and a sense of self-efficacy, but also working with a group so that all children are accepted by their classmates. Finally, to be social competency playing a mind dimension, normative adjustment that involves respect for others. We expect that training teachers to promote this approach will help children to improve their well-being and mental health. For more information about the BOOST project, you can have a look. And if you want to contact with us, remember, here are the data. Thank you very much for your attention.
As it happens, we have time for a few questions. There's a microphone, I assume, somewhere. If you just raise your hand.
Hi, thank you for very interesting and helpful presentations. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on specific examples of making pro-social behaviors popular. So if you have found in your research, what are some of the difficulties with concrete examples and how to go about them? Thank you.
Do you want to take that?
Yes, okay. I cannot see you very well, but we have in mind that if intervention programs, we try to give only specific or the training in a specific training, it doesn't mean that when they are relating with others, they are going to put in practice. For this, it is important to have in mind this complex model that not only pay attention to the training in a specific social skill or emotional skill, because it's different. We have a big challenge, and it's the translation. What they are learning in the school to their real life. And to give short pills of specific skills, it doesn't mean that they are going to get it.
Yeah, and we have to take into account that it's not so easy to install a pro-social norm in a classroom, because in the study that we did, we found that much more classrooms had a mixed norm. And it turns out that in a mixed norm classroom, bad wins from good. So it's important to think about how we can also improve these classes in secondary education in such a way that they become more and more pro-social, and that we diminish the link between aggression and popularity.
Hello, that was really interesting. Thank you very much. I was just remembering when you were talking about how a child who defended could actually be more popular than the aggressor, and I was remembering some previous research that I'd read which showed that a defender really needed to have status in the first place to be allowed by the peer group to defend, and then that would increase their status on top of it. I can't remember anything more about that research, but it sort of sparked a memory. And I just wondered about how or if we should be using particular children as champions, as models, and the risks involved there, if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the question whether we really should have specific children in a class as social reference that influence the rest of the class. And there is network research on that topic. So, for example, in smoking prevention, we sometimes see that people try to get the popular kids to stop first in the hope that the others will follow. And in a network that I showed, maybe you remember it, there were 3 groups in the class, but there was 1 child in the middle. So if you had looked very carefully, you could have seen that there was 1 child that was connected to all the groups. And that might be an ideal mediator in such a classroom, the one that knows what's going on, that can inform the teacher. But at the same time, we have to think about that our children, of course, and these children were about 10 years old. So how much pressure can you put as a teacher on a 10-year-old child to be the mediator and tell the teacher what's going on in the classroom? So I don't think that we know a lot about these types of issues, but it's definitely worth of interest. So if there are young people, please do pick up these topics.
Hi. I have 2 questions. The first one was just around whether you found generally that there was a big difference between what kids thought they ought to do in a situation and what they actually did. Was there generally much difference? And the other one was, when I was here 3 years ago, there was an interesting study on hierarchy in a classroom, and it found that where there was a flatter hierarchy, there was less bullying. And generally, that was encouraged by kind of getting kids to really know everybody in the class and not just stick to social groups. And I just wondered if that was something that came out of your research too.
Yeah, but so in general, there is definitely, of course, a difference between what people think and what they do. And that's also why we have the term pluralistic ignorance, because we often have self-reinforcing unjust beliefs. And there is really a need for more insights on how to correct these misperceptions. And coming back to your second question, there's also a need to know more about how a hierarchy really works and how it influences classroom processes. Because there is indeed some evidence that a more egalitarian classroom works better. But sometimes there's also evidence that a more hierarchical classroom can work as well. And it maybe depends on the situations and maybe also depends on the prevailing norms. So I don't think that we have the handbook, the textbook answers yet. So we are searching for more insights.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more question.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. My name is Hezron. I have one question, and when you're talking about the norm, we know that these norms are developed by various contexts. We have the family, which contributes in developing these norms, and we have maybe the classroom context, the norms which are really developed maybe by the teacher, setting the climate, and we have the groups which also form the norms. So which norms are we talking about, and who is the main influencers of the norms? Are they the group, the family, or the classroom by the teacher?
It's a complex behavior. We cannot pay attention only to one dimension. And when we speak, what we know is that what is happening into these implicit conventions and norms that are generated into the groups are relevant, but also is mainly that in family what is happening and what is defined into the family is also so important. But we have to have in mind that if we want to develop intervention programs, we have to pay attention what is happening between classmates, because we can find answer to what is happening. Yeah.
But in addition, I was talking about the norm among peers. But I have another study published in 2013 in the Journal of Education Psychology, in which I show that if a teacher has a lot of self-efficacy to tackle bullying, then the teacher can make the difference. And that is not needed if you have a an anti-bullying classroom. So if the classroom is easy, then it doesn't matter so much whether you have the skills or not. But if you have a difficult classroom, then you need a teacher that is a role model. So we have to invest in that too.
Okay, thank you very much. There was one thing that struck me there, that there was a mention there of self-efficacy, and it reminded me that so much of this work derives from Albert Bandura's work. And I can tell you that I checked last night, at 93, he's still going strong. Okay. Can I, on your behalf, then thank our two speakers for such a very interesting presentation and maintaining the momentum throughout the session. Thank you very much.